This happened in 2022. I wasn't prepared for how loud life gets when it's just you and a newborn in an old Baltimore apartment. The building was brick outside and thin plaster inside, which basically meant every sound belonged to everyone. In 2022, I was newly single, working remote 3 days a week for a nonprofit, and measuring time in ounces. 4 ounces bought me 30 minutes. 2 ounces meant we were up again before the microwave beeped. The place was a third-floor walk-up. My unit had a narrow living room, a galley kitchen that looked into brick, and a small bedroom where the crib fit only if I turned it sideways. A radiator rattled when it felt like it. The first month was a fog. I love my daughter completely, but I also said, I can't do this to the sink more times than I'll admit. The first time he yelled, she was 4 weeks old. She had one of those mysterious nighttime cries, not hunger or a wet diaper, just fury at existing. I walked her around the living room when someone pounded the wall so hard a framed print tilted. Then a man's voice came clear through the drywall. "Shut it up!" I froze, stunned. My daughter paused, then started crying harder. I whispered, "I'm trying," though I knew he couldn't hear me. I thought it could have just been a bad moment from a tired neighbor. But it happened again. Not every night, but enough. Every time she cried too long, he'd hit the wall and shout. First, it was "Quiet that thing." Then, "Make it stop." His voice carried a hard edge, sometimes slurred, sometimes sharp. I tried everything: white noise machines, rolled towels at the baseboards, moving the crib to the far wall. I spoke in whispers after dark. Nothing helped. The yelling got under my skin in a way I hadn't expected. My daughter was too little to understand, but to me, it felt like someone was cursing her for existing. Then came the first note, folded, wedged in my doorframe. "Teach your baby manners." Blue ballpoint, cramped letters. I snapped a photo, put it on top of the fridge, and emailed my landlord. She said babies cry, it was normal, and to let her know if it escalated. The next note said, "If you won't control it, I will call someone who can." This one taped right to my screen door. I photographed it too. My sister told me to start a paper trail and get a camera. The third note chilled me. Printed neatly on a computer, "I know when you feed her. 1 a.m., 3:30 a.m., 5 a.m. At the bottom, a coffee ring. He wasn't just annoyed anymore, he was keeping track. I finally decided to confront him. At 9 in the morning, baby strapped to my chest, I knocked. He opened the door like the knock insulted him. He was younger than I expected, late 30s maybe, with gray skin and a crab t-shirt. He looked at my baby first, then at me. "I live next door," I said. "I'm doing everything I can. She cries, that's what babies do, but I need you to stop yelling and stop leaving notes." "You sorry doesn't help me sleep," he said flatly. "I move the crib, I run white noise, I can add rugs." "You can stop it from crying," he said. "I cannot," I said. He shrugged and shut the door. For a few days, he was quiet. Then one rainy night, it started again. "Enough, Pound. Enough." My picture frame fell off the wall. A new note was under my welcome mat. "Move her to the kitchen where I don't hear it, or move." That night, my sister came with food and told me to call the police non-emergency line. The dispatcher said they couldn't do much unless something happened in the moment. Notes and yelling were civil. A week later, something did happen. Around 2 a.m., while feeding my daughter, I heard my doorknob rattle. Not a knock. Someone just trying to get in. I froze in the middle of the room, my heart thudding and clutching the baby. The knob turned again. Then silence, except the sound of someone breathing just outside the door. I said, loud enough to carry, "Go away, I'm calling the police." The breathing stopped. I called 911 immediately. When officers arrived 10 minutes later, they knocked, badges up. I let them in and explained about the notes and the yelling. One officer checked the hall, then came back with a folded paper tucked in my screen door. It read, "Next time I call Child Services." The officers logged it, told me to call again if anything else happened. One gave me the number for the district officer who handles landlord issues. Then they left. I didn't sleep again that night. Every sound became a footstep. I moved out within 3 weeks. My sister rented a van and helped me haul what I could. The landlord said the neighbor denied everything. I didn't care. I was gone. My new place is a basement unit in a row house 10 blocks away. The walls are thicker. The neighbor on one side is a retired teacher who bakes. The other side is a quiet guy with headphones. My daughter is 10 months old now, laughing and smearing bananas everywhere. But some things stayed. When she cries at night, there's still a flash of tension in my chest. I look at the door without meaning to. I think about the sound of that knob turning, the way someone tried to take hold of my door. I think about those notes. Would he have really tried something? I'll never know. What I do know is this: walls aren't agreements. If someone tells you who they are through them, believe it. I still tell my daughter when she fusses, "You're allowed," because she is, and because I refuse to let his voice echo louder than mine.
Grocery Outlet, your extreme value headquarters, is tackling high prices so you can have a big game day win. Assorted 12 packs of Pepsi are only $2.99 each. No instant replay needed.
When my youngest left for college in 2021, I started looking at my house differently. For 20 years, it had been filled with the constant noise of kids. Friends coming through the back door, music too loud in the basement, and cereal bowls left on the counter like offerings. Suddenly it was quiet, and quiet can feel like possibility. The house itself sat on a tree-lined street in a neighborhood where everyone knows when you mow and whether your porch light burns out. My place was modest but cared for. Fresh gray trim, lilacs along the fence, and a front lawn I kept trimmed sharp enough to make my dad proud. Inside, I polished the hardwood floors until they gleamed and set a lemon candle in the kitchen before every showing. I wanted buyers to imagine stepping into something easy, something fresh. I was ready to downsize, maybe find a condo near the Centennial Trail. Less mowing, more walking. A new chapter. That was the plan, until Mia, my neighbor, stepped in. Mia lived next door in a one-story with overgrown planters and too many boxes stacked on the porch. She was about my age, maybe a year younger, always in running shoes, though I never saw her run. We weren't friends, not even really acquaintances, just the polite wave when trash bins rolled out. That was enough for me. The day after the for sale sign went up, she cornered me at the mailbox. "I saw the listing," she said, leaning one arm across the lid like she owned it. "You can't sell without my permission." I laughed, thinking it was a joke. "This isn't an HOA," I said. She didn't laugh. She looked at me with that squint people get when they're picking their words one by one. "We have to approve. We can't have just anybody moving in." I told myself she was eccentric and walked away. But it stuck with me. The way she'd said, "we," like she spoke for the entire block. Then, on the morning of my first showing, I found flyers scattered across my porch and lawn. Big red letters screamed, "Is your neighborhood safe?" They advertised a home security company. At first, I thought it was coincidence, until I noticed the same flyers tucked under the wiper blades of my realtor Julie's car. The next day, a bag of trash appeared neatly dumped in the patch of grass by my walkway. Coffee grounds, spoiled lettuce, and something sticky that left ants marching by afternoon. I cleaned it up, grumbling, but something about it felt intentional. Then I caught her. A couple from Coeur d'Alene came to tour. I'd stepped out to give them space, walking to the grocery. When I returned, I saw Mia at the property line talking directly to them. "There's been car prowls here every week," she said, loud. "And that roof? It's original. 15 grand at least." The couple looked between her, my house, and their realtor. Within minutes, they left. Julie met my eyes. She didn't say anything, but the frustration in her eyes was clear and said, "Enough." I confronted Mia at the mailbox a few days later. "Please stop talking to buyers," I said firmly. "It's harassment." She smiled with that condescending air like she was humoring a child. "I'm just informing. If they can't handle the truth, maybe they don't belong here." After that, things escalated. A bright orange city code notice appeared taped to my door. "Possible violation. Contact inspector." It listed excessive weeds and deteriorated fencing. I panicked for half a day until the inspector himself showed up, looked around, and shook his head. "Your yard's fine. Fence is fine." Complaint was anonymous. He didn't say her name, but his eyes slid to her house before he left. Showings became exhausting. I'd sweep up broken glass mysteriously appearing on the walkway. Buyers would arrive to find bags of garbage on the lawn. Once, Mia intercepted two women touring and told them loudly, "She's selling because of crime. Ask her." Another time she shouted, "Did she disclose the sump pump? I don't even have a sump pump." I started documenting everything. Photos, dates, screenshots. Julie said it was the best I could do, short of legal action. The worst came on a bright Saturday morning. A young couple stood on my porch asking about price. They looked perfect. Serious questions, hopeful eyes. I felt that flicker of relief, the sense that this might finally work. Then Mia came marching up the walkway. "You need to know," she told them, pointing at my house. She didn't disclose the basement leak, and this neighborhood is full of break-ins. She waved her phone like proof. "I'll call the inspector again." The couple looked at each other, uneasy. The woman tucked her hair nervously behind her ear. "We'll think about it," she said. And they left. My throat felt and I couldn't even speak. Julie called the police. Officers came, listened, and wrote a report, but in the end they called it civil. Unless she trespassed or threatened me directly, there wasn't much they could do. That night, I smelled cigarettes through my bedroom window. I pulled the curtain back just enough to see a glowing ember near my trash bins. A figure stood in the shadows, watching. By morning, more garbage was spread across the lawn, placed deliberately. I couldn't take it anymore. Within weeks, I accepted a lower offer from a woman who toured midday when Mia wasn't home. The inspection passed easily. I packed quietly, moved to a townhome near the river, and didn't look back. But the damage stuck around, quiet but heavy. Even now, when I hear a neighbor's wind chime or see someone hovering near a mailbox, I feel that same tension coil in my stomach. I keep replaying her words, "You can't sell without my permission." Her reason? Still a mystery. Maybe control, maybe jealousy, or something unhinged. But the truth is, it doesn't take a haunted house or a masked stranger to terrify you. Sometimes it's the neighbor you wave to who decides your life isn't yours to live. By 2016, I was 52, retired, and finally learning what quiet felt like. I left the Department of Corrections at 50. 30 years of concrete, keys, and broken promises will grind you down in ways sleep can't fix. I lived in a one-story place on the south side of Baton Rouge with a deep backyard. I kept the grass trimmed, did little projects around the shed, grilled when the Saints played, and sat out on the back steps with a cold can while Jasper, my shepherd mutt, trotted the fence line like it was his beat. I liked routine. I liked order. A man doesn't spend 3 decades walking ranges without craving a yard where things stay put. The fence had been there when I bought the place. 6-foot cypress privacy boards running the line, with old chain link behind it that marked the true property boundary. I'd replaced 3 posts over the years, dug them out with an auger, and set them deep. That fence wasn't pretty, but it stood straight, and that was good enough. That spring, a guy moved in next door. Travis, late 30s, thin, shaved head, drove a lifted black pickup with tires that belonged on farm equipment. Said he did contracting, which around here could mean sheetrock, wiring, or nothing at all. Odd hours, baselines late at night that made the boards hum. We shook hands the first week. Nothing unusual. The first problem came 2 months later. I was raking magnolia leaves when I saw him stretched out with a tape measure along the back fence. He straightened up and waved me over like he'd found something important. "You know this fence is on my property," he said. I told him the truth. The fence sat a foot inside mine, leaving the easement clear so Entergy could get to the line. "Been that way since before me," I said. "My survey shows different," he said. "Show me the survey," I answered. He said he'd get it from a guy. I didn't think much of it. People love to talk about surveys they can't produce. A week later, I found 2 panels down behind the shed, nails scattered in the dirt like teeth. Not wind damage. Hands had been there. I bolted them back with lags this time. Next morning, Jasper found a Popeyes bag tossed into the grass, grease still wet. A half-gnawed bone lying clean, untouched. Jasper would have shredded that bone if he'd gotten it. That meant someone threw it in overnight. It kept happening. A beer bottle upright in the lawn like a marker. A smear of something rancid on the shed door. At first I thought maybe kids cutting through, but then I set a trail camera. Day 3, the footage caught Travis in slides and gym shorts, leaning over to toss something underhand. I walked to his porch with the printouts in my hand. He opened the door with a thin smile. "Stop throwing things in my yard," I said. He shrugged. "Could be raccoons." "Raccoons don't shop for stew meat," I told him. "You keep it on your side, I won't call the sheriff." He stepped closer. "You think you can tell me what to do?" "I'm telling you not to poison my dog," I said. My voice stayed flat. Years of corrections teach you how not to give a man the reaction he's hunting for. After that, Jasper started finding little piles of raw meat along the fence line. I picked them up with gloves and a bucket, cursing while the cicadas screamed overhead. Jasper whined when I kept him leashed, ears flicking toward the fence. I set more cameras, this time up high, wired, out of reach. Got him again. Travis sliding meat under the boards like it was a game. I brought the stills to his face. He didn't deny it. Just smiled that smile and called me warden. I'd never been a warden, but I knew what he meant. The shed door started showing scratches. Words carved into the paint with a nail. Nothing clever, just nasty. I painted over twice. The third time I left it, filed a report with the parish deputy. The young officer told me to keep documenting and said, "Call us if it jumps a lane." It felt like it already had. August. Heat baked into the ground. I was on the back steps with a can in my hand, Jasper sniffing his usual rounds. He froze near the shed. Not barking, just that stiff, ears forward stare dogs do when the yard has changed. I set the can down, picked up the heavy flashlight by the door, and walked the edge with the beam off. When I flicked it on, the light caught him. Travis stood just beyond the fence, pistol hanging by his thigh. He was talking low, muttering about trespassers. "Travis," I said, "put the gun back in your house." He raised it slightly, not aiming, but not resting either. "You're on my line," he said. "I'm on mine," I told him, "and I've got you on camera." Jasper's claws tapped the porch wood, and Travis twitched the pistol toward the sound like he was pointing at a ghost. I backed to the house, dialed 911 on speaker. Neighbor dispute with a firearm, I told dispatch. Man armed at the fence, pointing toward my property. We waited 10 minutes that felt longer than my whole career. Travis paced, muttering about how I had it coming. I stood in the doorway with the beam steady on his chest, not his eyes. Blue lights washed the boards. Officers ordered him to put the weapon down. He set it on the dirt and stepped back slow, like he was showing the world he knew how to act right when eyes were on him. They cuffed him and vaulted the fence. They asked if I wanted to press charges. I told them I wanted him to stop. They logged my footage and explained how to file a protective order. The judge signed it within a week. Travis stayed, quieter, but still stared when I brought the cans to the curb. He sold the house a year later, left behind a broken ladder, a rake, and a patch of overgrown azaleas. The new neighbors wave. They grill on weekends. Their toddler laughs at Jasper through the fence. I'd like to tell you it was all about the fence, but it wasn't. Some men just need a fight to feel taller. He saw a quiet man next door and thought quiet meant weak. What stays with me isn't the night with the gun. It's the months before, the small things, the garbage, the scratches on my shed, the raw meat I pulled from the grass with gloves while my dog whined at my side. That's how you break a neighbor down. One little trespass at a time until the night you step out and the gun is waiting. I still walk the yard every evening. Jasper still does his patrol. The fence is patched with new cypress that will silver with age. It looks strong. That's all I want it to be. If you want advice, don't meet petty with petty. Document everything. Call when you need to call. And if a man stands at your fence with a gun, don't try to prove anything. Back away, keep the light steady, and let the ones with badges handle it. That's the closest thing to peace you'll get. That year, I was managing a pet store in Springfield, Illinois. People think that kind of job is just feeding fish and scooping kibble, but it's constant. Customers asking which toys won't shred in a day, someone bringing in a lizard that hasn't eaten, kids pressing their noses to the glass tanks while I refill the crickets. I liked it, though. I liked knowing most of the dogs by name. Maggie the Beagle, Duke the Husky, a Yorkie named Gizmo that barked at every bag of treats. It kept me social, and after closing, I enjoyed going home to my little bungalow, just a few blocks off a busier stretch. The house wasn't much, but I kept it clean. Grass trimmed, porch swept, bins tucked back after pickup. I've always believed if you do your part, neighbors leave you alone. The guy next door didn't see it that way. Tom moved in about a year before the trouble started. Thin guy, looked about 40-something, always wearing that same black hoodie no matter how hot it got. He kept to himself. No porch lights, no hellos. I'd wave, just trying to be decent, and he'd look at me like I'd asked for money. Our first real words were about garbage. I was dragging my can back from the curb when he appeared on his side, arms crossed. "You crowd my space with that thing again. We'll have a problem," he said. I looked down. My can was 3 feet clear of the property line. I said, "All right, I'll keep it pulled tight," just to end the conversation. He didn't nod or smile, just turned and walked back up his steps. 2 days later, I opened my door for work and found a lump of spoiled meat on the porch. Gray, slimy, stinking like it had sat through a blackout. At first, I blamed raccoons. They knock bins over all the time around here. I scooped it with a shovel, dumped it in a bag, bleached the boards, and tried to laugh it off. At work, I joked with a coworker that raccoons were leaving me gifts. A week passed. Then one morning, there was a Ziploc bag set upright on the mat. Inside, feathers. Not from one bird. Different sizes and colors, some with the quills still wet with skin. That wasn't raccoons. Someone had sealed that bag. I stood there, wondering if I should call someone. In the end, I threw it in the trash and tried to move on. Then came the sparrow. Small, brown, dead, but untouched. It wasn't sprawled. It had been placed right in the center of the mat, with its wings tucked and head turned like it was sleeping. I took a photo before I bagged it. Proof. Because I knew if I didn't, my mind would try to downplay it later. That one changed everything. Spoiled meat could be trash. A Ziploc could be some sick prank. But a sparrow arranged like a gift? That was intent. Around that time, I caught Tom watching me. I came home from work, arms full of groceries, and he was on his porch with a cigarette, eyes flat, following me as I climbed the steps. I thought about asking if he'd seen anything weird, but the way he looked at me froze the words. It wasn't curiosity. It was something else. One morning, there was a nickel on the mat, heads up. Next to it, a small tuft of rabbit fur. No body. Just fur and a coin. As if someone wanted me to know they could leave anything they wanted. Anytime. I bought cameras that day. One over the porch, one covering the side gate. The cameras caught a blur at 4 a.m. A gloved hand reaching into frame, placing something, then pulling back fast. No face, no details. Just proof someone was doing this on purpose. I printed a still and walked to Tom's porch. He opened the door a crack, hoodie up, smoke curling out. "Recognize this?" I asked, holding the photo. He didn't even look. "Control your trash," he said, and closed the door. Thursday morning, I opened the door and froze. A rabbit lay across the welcome mat. That wasn't an accident. It didn't fall. Someone placed it there on purpose. My hands shook as I bagged it. I called the police, and 2 officers came out. They took photos, watched the camera clip of the hooded figure bending down to position it. Then they walked next door and spoke with Tom. He denied everything. They came back and said it was a civil matter. Nothing they could prove. I stood on my porch, smelling bleach where the rabbit had been, wondering what it would take before someone believed me. After the rabbit, it stopped. No more feathers. No more meat. No more animals. The silence itself felt staged, like the point had been made. Every time I opened the door, I braced myself for something waiting. My phone pinged all night with motion alerts that turned out to be moths or branches. I started talking about moving, even though I hadn't planned to leave for another year. I finished the lease but didn't renew. I found an apartment above a bakery downtown. No yard, no porch, no mat. Just a locked stairwell and the smell of bread at 6 a.m. The worst part is knowing someone wanted me to see those animals, wanted me to think about them every time I stepped outside. And it worked. I've been a nurse for more than 20 years, and one thing you learn quick is people tell you more than you ask for. Strangers, patients, families in waiting rooms, they all unload bits of their lives. Sometimes those confessions stay behind in the hospital, and sometimes they follow you home. Back in 2020, I just moved into a small shotgun house in Mobile, Alabama. It was the middle of the pandemic, and I was coming off some of the hardest shifts of my life. I wanted someplace quiet, with a patch of yard, a porch where I could drink coffee on mornings I wasn't scheduled. I thought I found it. My new place sat on a tree-lined street where most folks had lived for decades. Next door was Mrs. Cunningham, though everyone called her Miss Cunny. She was in her 70s, maybe 80, always in a pressed blouse and a patterned scarf tied under her chin. She swept her porch every morning, even in July when the air felt like soup. She was the first to greet me. I'd be coming home in scrubs, bag slung over my shoulder, and she'd call out from her porch. We started chatting at the mailbox, short conversations at first. She asked about my hours, about the hospital. Then she always slipped in a line about her son. "He's here," she'd say, tapping the doorframe. "Just shy, doesn't care for folks." She said it with a little smile, like it was an inside joke. The odd thing was, I never saw him. Not once. At first, I shrugged it off. Plenty of people keep to themselves, and if her son was older and private, who was I to judge? But the house gave off little signs that gnawed at me. Amazon deliveries came almost weekly, packages clearly marked for men. Shirts, undershirts, socks, slippers. I'd see her lugging them in, stacked to her chin. At night, even when the air was mild, her attic fan hummed loud enough I could hear it from my yard. Sometimes it rattled like it hadn't been serviced in years. And once in a while, when the wind shifted, I caught a smell. Lemon cleaner mixed with something faint and sickly sweet. Didn't seem like garbage or flowers. Something else. I tried to explain it away. People clean differently. Houses have smells. I was a nurse. I knew how my mind could make connections I didn't want. But Miss Cunny kept talking about him. "He likes peach yogurt," she said once. Another time, "He's a reader. Doesn't care for television." Always present tense. Always as though he just stepped into the next room. One night, I was rinsing dishes at my kitchen sink. From there, I had a clear view of her attic window across the narrow side yard. The fan cord drooped like always. The glass was mostly dark, catching reflections of streetlight glow. Then something shifted. The old rocking chair up there was moving. Slow arcs. And in the half-light, I swore I saw a pale oval where a face should be. Shoulders too. Upright, like someone sitting still. The chair rocked again, then stopped. A stop that felt like whoever was sitting had seen me notice. I stood there, staring until my own reflection overtook the glass. When I looked again, the figure was gone. The chair sat still. I didn't tell anyone that night. I didn't want to sound crazy or worse, like I was gossiping about an elderly neighbor. As weeks passed, I noticed I wasn't the only one uneasy. Two older women who walked their dogs stopped short one morning when I mentioned living next to Miss Cunny. They shared a look. One said softly, "She's been through a lot with that boy." The other nodded but wouldn't elaborate. Later, I overheard another neighbor say something about her son being better off inside. The tone was sympathetic, but it wasn't casual. It was careful, like they were all agreeing not to pry too deep. I wanted to believe that explained it. Maybe he had medical issues, maybe he really was just reclusive. But I kept thinking about that rocking chair, about the smell, about the endless packages. Miss Cunny herself never acted like anything was wrong. She'd bring up her son like he was just behind the wall. "He reads until late," she told me once. "I keep the light on in the attic for him." Another time, "He doesn't like strangers looking in. That's why I keep the curtains drawn." The way she said it, it was tender, almost protective. I didn't doubt she loved him. I just couldn't make sense of why no one had ever seen him. And once, as she was speaking, she looked back at her front door, almost like checking that he wasn't listening. In early September, I saw her at her mailbox, hand pressed to her chest, face pale. I offered to walk her back up the steps. She thanked me, saying her knees were worse lately. When she sat down on her porch chair, she smiled and said, "We always take care. That's how we make it this far." We, meaning her and her son. I believed her because it was easier. 3 weeks later, the street filled with flashing lights. Police cars. then an ambulance. Word traveled quick. No one had seen her in days. I stood at my fence as officers went in. They were inside for hours. Too long for a simple wellness check. More cars came. Men in gloves carried black cases. A stretcher came out, covered, and I knew she was gone. But they stayed. And the way their faces looked, it wasn't just grief, it was unease. Rumors spread in whispers. Some said there had never been a son. Others said there had been, once. The truth came out days later. There had been a son. And upstairs in that attic, they found him. Seated in a rocking chair by the window. Dressed, shoes tied. Clothes changed often enough to keep things intact. Miss Cunny had kept him there. Preserved, tended, made to look like he was simply shy, not gone. Her niece came to collect things. She looked gray, worn, like the weight of explaining would never leave her. The city boarded the house. Geraniums wilted on the porch. The attic fan finally stopped, but the smell of lemon still drifted when the air was damp, like it had seeped into the wood. I never walked that stretch of sidewalk again. Even now, if I have to pass, I keep my eyes down. Because if I look at that attic window, even covered with plywood, I see the chair rock. And I remember the pale figure that wasn't supposed to still be there. And I think about the way she said it. He's just shy. Like a spell. Like words strong enough to keep him alive. For her, at least. If these stories made you realize the real monsters sometimes live right next door, go ahead and smash that like button, subscribe so you never miss a scare, and let me know which neighbor story you'd move away from immediately. And if you think fluorescent lights and security cameras make the night shift safe, you haven't watched this channel enough. Click now to watch 4 very I'm a civil engineer, which means I have an annoying habit of checking numbers. When I bought my house in Reno in December of 2022, the first thing I did, before moving boxes, before hanging curtains, was compare the listing specs to my own measurements. Square footage, ceiling heights, wall lengths. If something's off, it nags at me. And in this case, it was off. Not by much, 40 square feet maybe, but off enough that I couldn't ignore it. The house was a 70s ranch with a partially finished basement. Nothing exotic. Single story, simple footprint. The kind of house you can learn in a weekend. But when I tallied the rooms against the listing, my numbers didn't match. Somewhere in the geometry, there was space that wasn't accounted for. At first, I figured it was just realtor error. It happens all the time. But then I noticed something stranger. Along the north wall of the living room, a built-in bookshelf jutted out just a little too far, making the proportions odd. I chalked it up to dated design. This was the 70s after all. But that missing square footage nagged at me. One Sunday, I started pulling measurements wall to wall, noting distances, drawing a sketch on graph paper. In the back hallway, behind the bookshelf wall, I noticed the numbers didn't add up. There should have been 5 more feet of depth. Instead, the corridor ended flat. That night, I pressed my palm against the paneling. Hollow. Not just drywall hollow. Empty space hollow. I told myself it was probably an old utility chase, but the shape was too large, too intentional. A week later, I couldn't help myself. I had to check. I pulled the lowest shelf from the built-in unit and saw faint seams along the drywall behind it. Not cracks, not age, seams. Like something had been cut and replastered. I tapped along until my knuckles found a softer spot. A rectangle, waist height, about 2 feet wide. Exactly where a concealed door would be. It took me 3 days of staring before I tried. Finally, on a Friday night, I slid a pry bar into the seam and pulled. The panel groaned, then swung inward. Behind it, a narrow, windowless room. Bare drywall, single light fixture dangling from the ceiling, wires exposed. No furniture, just a faint chemical smell. And on the ceiling, bolted into the joists, a bracket, the kind you'd mount a camera on. That's when my scalp prickled. Not because of ghosts or monsters, but because someone had deliberately built this space to watch. The room was clean, too clean. No dust, no cobwebs, no dead bugs. Just bare floor and that faint scent, sharp like rubbing alcohol. I stepped in, heart in my throat, making sure nothing was hiding in the corners. Nothing else. No evidence of squatters, just the bracket. I killed the light, pulled the door shut, and shoved the bookshelf back into place. I told myself maybe it was left over from renovations, maybe a security-conscious previous owner. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. Who needs a secret room just to mount a camera? And why seal it? Over the next week, the paranoia turned practical. I called the realtor, asked about prior owners. She skimmed her file, said the last guy was a contractor, kept to himself, sold after just 2 years. Nothing flagged, no history that screamed danger, but people don't build hidden rooms with camera mounts for nothing. One night around 2 a.m., I woke to a noise. Subtle but distinct. A hinge settling. A floorboard pressed. I crept into the hall, barefoot, holding the heavy mag light I keep on the nightstand. The bookshelf was ajar. Not much, just an inch. Enough. I didn't check further. I backed straight out the front door, phone in hand, and called the police from my driveway. They arrived fast. 2 cruisers. Officers swept the house while I stood shivering in the December air. When they came back, their faces were tight. No one was inside. The police couldn't do much. No forced entry, no suspect. They recommended new locks, better security, maybe even selling, if I felt unsafe. Airbnb-style rentals are common in my neighborhood, and one officer speculated that maybe the room was built for surveillance of guests before I bought the place. "We've seen it before," he said. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the living room with the lights on. When morning came, I started arrangements to move. Selling was humiliating, but easier than staying. I can't help it anymore. I don't even think about it. Every building I walk into, I count walls. I trace floor plans. If the numbers don't add up, I want to know why. Because somewhere in Reno, someone built a secret room for watching. And I lived in it, oblivious. I've always been more comfortable behind a screen than shaking hands with new people. So when I finally bought a house, my first one after years of renting, I thought the best part would be the quiet. No upstairs neighbors blasting TV, no landlords scheduling quick inspections, no roommates leaving dirty dishes in the sink. Just me, my work laptop, and the low buzz of my servers in a home office I could actually call mine. The house was a modest 2-bedroom in Asheville, North Carolina. A little older, built in the 70s, but clean and recently renovated. It had that smell of fresh paint and sawdust still lingering, which made it feel new enough to me. The realtor called it a starter home, but I wasn't thinking of it that way. For me, it was an endpoint, my permanent spot. The first week, I kept things simple. Groceries, unpacking, long walks around the neighborhood at night. It was a quiet street, lined with trees and mostly retirees who waved. On my third evening, while I was dragging my trash bin back from the curb, the woman across the street called over. "You must be the new guy again." "Again?" I asked, still gripping the bin handle. She smiled like she'd said something funny. Yeah, we just had a new guy there a few months ago. Didn't last long. I figured she was confused. Maybe she meant the previous owner, someone who'd sold quickly. Well, hopefully I stick around, I said, giving the polite wave that means end of conversation. But the next day, while I was mowing the patchy front lawn, an older man from 2 doors down walked by and gave me almost the exact same line. Another new owner already? Huh? This time I pressed. What do you mean another? The house just sold. The man shrugged, adjusted his ball cap. Yeah, but there was that guy before you. Moved in back in May. Thought it was weird nobody told us he left. Then he nodded like it was casual small talk and kept walking. That stuck with me. My paperwork was clear. I'd closed in August. The deed transfer showed the last owner was a management company that flipped the place. No one else had owned it recently. At least not officially. I told myself not to overthink it. Neighbors sometimes misremember things. But it didn't stop me from going back through the drawers of documents the realtor left me. Nothing unusual. Just the same signatures, the same title company stamps. Still, once the idea was planted, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The first truly odd thing happened a week later. I'd been running updates on some projects late into the night and crashed at my desk. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up and went to the kitchen for water. The back porch light was on. I never turned that light on. The switch was near the back door, and I hadn't even touched it since moving in. I stood there in the dark kitchen staring at the glow through the glass, trying to work out if I'd somehow brushed the switch earlier. I turned it off and went back to bed, telling myself not to spiral. The next morning, I mentioned it casually to the same neighbor who'd first called me the new guy again. She frowned. You sure you didn't see the other one? She asked. My stomach dropped a little. The other one? The man who lived there before you, she said, lowering her voice a little. Tall, shaved head. He used to sit on that porch late at night with the light on. Smoked a lot. He'd nod when I waved. Then one day, gone. I told her I thought she was mistaken. Nobody had mentioned another owner to me, just the management company. She gave me this look like she wanted to argue, but decided against it. She just said, and went back inside. I dug deeper. I checked county property records, tax filings, anything that might show a short-term transfer. Nothing. The house went from the management company directly to me, but the neighbors kept hinting. One morning while walking, I passed a couple tending their garden. The man leaned on his shovel and said, "You fixed the fence already?" That other guy never bothered. I hadn't touched the fence. That night, curiosity overrode my better judgment. I searched for news stories, obituaries, anything tied to my address. Buried on the 3rd page of results was a local missing person bulletin. A man named Aaron Peters, last seen in Asheville in June. The photo wasn't great. Grainy, probably cropped from social media, but I could see it. Tall, shaved head, looked like someone who might stand on a porch with a cigarette. The timeline gnawed at me. June disappearance. Neighbors saying a few months ago. And me moving in during August. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe he was a tenant renting under the table from the management company. Maybe he left and never told anyone. Missing didn't have to mean the darker thing. But then the noises started. My bedroom backed up against the attic crawl space. It was nothing more than a hatch in the hallway ceiling, but late at night, I'd hear these soft thumps, like something moving up there. I wanted to believe it was animals, a raccoon maybe, or squirrels. But the rhythm was wrong. Too deliberate, too spaced out, like footsteps trying to be quiet. I didn't sleep well after that. One Friday night, after another restless stretch, I sat up in bed just listening. The same faint noises I'd been brushing off for weeks were back. Shuffling, like someone moving their weight across boards. The sound didn't belong to the house settling. It was weirdly spaced out, like something was actually moving. Around 2 a.m., I saw that the porch light was on again. I didn't sleep after that. I lay awake until dawn, rehearsing what I'd do if I heard the noises again. By Saturday morning, I was done second-guessing myself. I pulled the attic ladder down, flashlight in hand, my chest tight, but I kept it together. The moment the light cut across the rafters, I froze. A man was standing there. Tall, shoulders hunched slightly, head shaved clean. He was angled toward me like he'd been waiting. We just looked at each other for a breath too long, neither moving. Then instinct took over. I dropped the flashlight, spun, and ran out the front door, barefoot on the porch, keys forgotten on the counter. Behind me, I heard the rapid creak of the attic ladder, then heavy steps pounding down the hall. A moment later, the slam of the back door and the quick scatter of footsteps fading into the yard. My hands shook so badly I barely managed to dial. When the police arrived, I pointed them to the attic, to the backyard. They searched the house, the fence line, even walked the block. No trace. The officer said whoever it was probably bolted the second I ran. He wrote the report, gave me the kind of look that says you're not crazy, but also don't stay here tonight. I didn't. And even now, I can't stop picturing that silhouette in the flashlight beam. The way he didn't rush me. The way he just stood there waiting for me to make the first move. I bought my house in Santa Fe in February of 2023, right after the New Year market dip. I'm an architect by trade, so I had the confidence to take on something a little older, something that needed love but not full-blown rescue. The Adobe-style ranch I landed on was exactly that. Single story, with enough quirks to keep me busy but not overwhelmed. The first week was bliss in the way only fresh starts are. Painting walls, mapping furniture, stacking books in corners until shelves could be mounted. At night, I'd sit on the floor with takeout cartons and enjoy the silence. For once, I had something of my own. The first odd detail was small. While putting up new shelves in the guest room, I noticed the wall cavity felt strange. Too deep. You get used to measuring with your body after a while in this field. How long your arm is, how far a screw should bite, the thickness of drywall. This one felt off. When I tapped it, the sound didn't resolve into the usual solid echo. It had a hollow drag, like there was more space than there should be. I chalked it up to shoddy construction. Santa Fe is full of add-ons and remodels where corners were cut. I let it go. By the second week, groceries started disappearing. At first, I thought it was me. I'd grab a string cheese, set the rest back, then swear the next morning that 2 more were gone. A carton of eggs seemed lighter than I remembered. Half a leftover burrito vanished from the fridge when I could picture perfectly leaving it on the middle shelf. It was easy to write off. Moving is chaos. Stress makes you forget. But I found myself double-checking the fridge, literally counting things before heading to work. When I came back, a banana I'd set aside was gone. The second odd thing was the smell. Not bad at first. Just a faint trace of smoke. Not fireplace smoke, not incense, but tobacco. I don't smoke, and the previous owner was a yoga instructor who'd made sure to tell me the house had never been smoked in. I walked every room, sniffing corners like a bloodhound, but it wasn't strong enough to pin down. Just a whiff, then nothing. My job gives me the habit of tinkering. I decided to knock out a small alcove in the living room to open up space for a recessed shelf. Simple job. Measure, score, check the studs. But when I cut a test hole, I noticed something that stopped me cold. The cavity wasn't 4 inches thick like a standard wall. It wasn't 6 like an old plaster lath. It was closer to a foot. And worse, I found debris inside. A crumpled fast food wrapper, the end of a cigarette butt, ash still clinging. This wasn't construction oddity. Someone had been using the void. I taped over the hole and couldn't look away. Just sat there staring at it like waiting for, I don't even know what. That evening, I needed proof, if only to convince myself I wasn't losing it. The next day, I left my phone recording on the counter before heading to a job site. 6 hours later, I came back, rewound the footage, and there it was, faint but clear. The soft creak of movement, a cough muffled by layers of insulation, and at one point, the snap of a lighter. I called a contractor friend, told him I discovered a structural irregularity, and asked if he'd swing by to help me evaluate. He came that Saturday. We pulled open a larger section of wall in the guest room. Inside was bedding, thin blankets laid across insulation, and a small duffel bag shoved into the corner. My friend stepped back like he'd touched a live wire. "You need to call the cops, now." The officers didn't laugh. That was the worst part. They didn't roll their eyes or suggest I was mistaken. They moved through the house with grim efficiency, checking vents, closets, crawl spaces. They found a narrow opening inside the wall void that led up toward the attic. Someone had been moving freely between the spaces, likely at night, slipping down while I was at work or asleep. The duffel bag contained wrappers, cigarette packs, and a cracked phone with no SIM card. The intruder wasn't there. They figured he'd slipped out the back when I was gone or even while we were making calls. "It happens more than you'd think," one officer said, almost apologetically. "Transients find these older houses easier to crawl into. You're lucky you found it when you did." Lucky didn't feel like the right word. I didn't sleep in the house that night. I grabbed a bag, booked a hotel, and sat there with every lamp on while the reality sank in. Someone had been inside with me, close enough to hear me brush my teeth, to smell dinner. The house wasn't unsafe structurally, but it was ruined for me. The intimacy of the violation was too much. Every sound now had weight. Every draft felt like breath. I ended up selling 6 months later at a loss. Disclosure laws meant I had to mention the incident in paperwork, which made for awkward conversations with buyers. One eventually bought it as a rental, probably thinking the story added character. As for me, every place I've lived since, I check. I measure the walls, I inspect the attic, and I press my nose to vents before sleeping, just to be sure they're not channels for more than air. Because if you've ever heard a stranger cough inside your walls, you never stop listening for it again. When I bought my house in Bakersfield, it felt like I'd finally caught my breath. I was 29, pediatric nurse pulling long shifts at the hospital, and for years I'd bounced between small apartments and roommates who never quite matched my schedule. The house wasn't big, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, creaky hardwood floors, but it was mine. For the first time in my adult life, I had a place where I could come home from a 12-hour shift, drop my bag on the same hook, and know no one else had touched a thing. The quiet was something I cherished. kids screaming in the hospital, machines beeping nonstop. I needed nights where the fridge was the loudest thing I heard. My routine settled in quick. Dinner, shower, folding laundry in front of the TV, then bed. Sometimes I'd leave my scrubs in the washer overnight and deal with them in the morning. Nothing dramatic, just small, lived-in rhythms that made the place feel safe. That's why it threw me when little things began to feel off. It started with groceries. At first, it was just a granola bar or two missing from the box, and I thought maybe I'd eaten them without remembering. Then one morning, I opened the fridge before work and found an empty Tupperware container sitting on the counter. I was almost sure it had leftovers inside when I went to bed. Again, I shrugged it off, told myself I was scatterbrained from night shifts, but it kept happening. Not every day, not even every week, but often enough that I started double-checking. I'd leave yogurt on the top shelf, and the next morning it would be gone. A bottle of iced tea would be half empty, even though I hadn't cracked it yet. The rational side of me insisted I was making mistakes. The part that grew up on crime shows whispered otherwise. Then came the noises. My bedroom sits just below the attic hatch. One night, maybe 3 weeks after moving in, I woke up around 2:30 a.m. to what sounded like faint shuffling above me. It wasn't pipes or creaks from cooling wood. This sounded heavier, like something was up there. I held my breath and listened until silence settled again. The next morning, I laughed it off at work, telling a fellow nurse my old house groans like a haunted movie. But once I noticed it, I couldn't unhear it. The noises weren't constant, but they returned. Little taps, scuffs, sometimes a long pause followed by another faint shuffle. Always between 2 and 4 in the morning. I bought traps, convinced myself I was dealing with a raccoon or oversized rat. Except nothing ever turned up in the traps. No droppings either. And rodents don't unscrew the cap on a soda bottle. The tipping point came one Saturday morning. I'd tossed laundry in the dryer the night before and left the folded pile on my dresser. When I went to grab scrubs for work, I noticed the neat stack was sloppier than I'd left it. The shirt on top was unfolded, like someone had picked it up and set it back down. I don't live with anyone. No one had a key. That was the first time my heart actually raced. I started paying more attention to things before I left for work. Just small things like the angle of the blinds or how I left my shoes by the door. When I came back, most of the time, nothing seemed off. But twice, I swear the blinds were tilted differently. Another time, a kitchen chair was pushed slightly farther from the table. I began to feel watched. Not just in the vague Home Alone way, but like my routines were familiar to someone else. Then one morning, I walked into the hallway and looked up. The attic hatch was open. Not wide, just a couple inches. The wooden panel shifted enough to see the seam wasn't flush. I stood there staring, coffee cooling in my hand, until I convinced myself maybe I'd bumped it while cleaning, but I couldn't reach it without the pull string, and I hadn't been up there at all. That night, I couldn't shake it. I kept looking at the ceiling above my bed, like expecting to see the panel move again. Sleep didn't come easy. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to a distinct thud overhead. My hand went automatically to the flashlight I'd left on the nightstand. I sat there gripping it, staring at the hatch. By morning, I'd had enough. After work, still in scrubs, I dragged a chair under the hatch, pulled the cord, and lowered the ladder. What got me right away was the smell. Not awful, but stale, like unwashed clothes and old food wrappers. I climbed a few steps and shined my light around. There, Against the far wall, a pile of blankets. Next to it, a camping lantern, half-burnt candles, a backpack, empty granola wrappers, an open water bottle. And worse, the vent. My bedroom has a ceiling vent that faces down at my bed. From where I stood in the attic, I could see clear sight lines straight through it. A blanket had been pushed near it, like someone had sat there watching. I scrambled down, slammed the hatch shut, and called the police. They came quick, 2 officers with flashlights and hands hovering near their belts. They searched the attic thoroughly, but found no one. Just the evidence: bedding, wrappers, a few personal items like a lighter and notebook. The window at the back of the attic had been nudged open, screen removed. Whoever it was must have slipped out when they heard me coming. The officers took photos, bagged some things, and told me it looked like someone had been staying there off and on for a while. Could have been weeks, maybe longer. They asked if I wanted to stay while they investigated. I shook my head. That night, I packed a bag and checked into a hotel near the hospital. I didn't go back to sleep in that house again. Eventually, I put it up for sale. Here's the thing, I'm not naive. I lock doors, I check windows. I thought I was careful. But none of that mattered when someone already had a place above me. Moving when I slept, eating my food, watching through vents. Now, every time I move into a new place, the first thing I do isn't unload boxes. It's check the attic, the basement, every crawl space. I shine a flashlight through every vent. Once you know someone can live above you, quietly, long enough to learn your patterns. Once you know how close danger can sit without you realizing, you don't forget. I still see that shifted attic hatch in my mind sometimes, hanging open just enough to suggest a presence. Still gives me chills when it crosses my mind. And I wonder how many nights I brushed my teeth or folded laundry while someone crouched above, memorizing the sound of my footsteps. I was in Pittsburgh in the summer of 2023, settling into a small brick duplex I had just bought. It was my first place on my own, and even though it needed some work, I was proud of it. I run a small online marketing business, and my hours make no sense. I'd spend most nights glued to my laptop until dawn. One of the first things I bought for myself when I moved in was a doorbell camera. My mom said it with a laugh, but I knew she kinda meant it. And I figured it couldn't hurt. I was in a neighborhood I didn't know, living alone, often awake when everyone else was asleep. Having that little camera at the front door felt like a safety net. It became part of my routine. Before shutting down for the night, I'd check the previous hour's footage, like flipping through a diary of the house. Usually it was nothing more than a raccoon waddling across the yard, or the neighbor's cat triggering the motion alert. But then, one Tuesday morning, I saw this man. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the feed showed him stepping into frame. He walked straight up the path, stopped in front of my door, and looked directly into the camera, right at the lens. He didn't knock, didn't speak. He just stood there for about half a minute, then turned and left the same way he came. I replayed it 3 times, trying to convince myself he was just drunk or confused. People stumble onto the wrong porch. But the steadiness of him bothered me. His movements weren't sloppy. They were measured, like he knew exactly what he was doing. 2 days later, Thursday morning, there it was again. Just after 3 a.m., same man, same routine. By the 3rd visit, Saturday morning, I couldn't write it off anymore. A pattern had formed, and once I see one, it just eats at me. I'm a researcher by nature. When things repeat, I start documenting. I save the clips, zoomed in on stills, tried to study his details. Mid-40s, medium build, jeans, plain shirt, dark hair cut close. No logos, no distinct features. He didn't carry anything. What got me wasn't what he did. It was what he didn't do. No knocking, no attempt to open the door, no words. Just that stare, like he knew I'd be watching later. Every other night, always just past 3 a.m., I scrubbed back and forth on the footage to see where he came from. The camera caught him entering from the left edge of the frame and leaving the same way. No car headlights. No other angles. Just appearing and disappearing on schedule. After a week, I stopped sleeping through it. Started setting an alarm for 3 a.m., opening the live view, and waiting. The first night I did that, I almost wished I hadn't. At 3:17 on the dot, he appeared. Same pace, same direction. He stepped up to the porch, lifted his chin, and locked eyes with the lens. Watching it live was worse than playback. He wasn't just on video. He was there right then, staring into the camera while I stared back. It felt mutual, like we were both keeping an appointment neither of us had spoken about. I called the non-emergency police line the next day, explained everything. The time, the repetition, the clips. The dispatcher was polite, but not exactly moved. "Send us the footage," she said. "We'll have patrol cars keep an eye out." I sent them. Nothing changed. The man kept coming. Some nights he skipped, but never more than one at a time. It was like he wanted me to relax before reminding me I shouldn't. I started noticing the psychological weight of the time itself. All evening, I dread 3 a.m. Midnight felt like a countdown. 2 o'clock felt like a warning bell. And when the alert chimed, even before I looked, I already knew what I'd see. And then one night, he broke the pattern, not by changing the time, but by changing himself. It was the 12th visit. I was sitting in the living room, porch light on, live feed running. At 3:18, there he was again, right on schedule. But this time, when he reached the porch, he didn't just stare. He smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile you'd want to see. Not friendly at all. Just the smallest upward curl, like he was acknowledging the routine, like he knew I was awake this time. That unsettled me more than anything else. It meant this wasn't random. It meant he wasn't just some wanderer. He was aware. I dialed 911 while he was still standing there. Told the dispatcher, "He's here right now. He comes at the same time every other night. Please send someone." By the time a cruiser rolled up, he was gone. The officer walked the street, shined a flashlight down the alley, checked porches. Nothing. My camera caught him leaving the edge of the frame like always. And then nothing more. The officer shrugged, told me to keep my doors locked, said they'd file a report, and then just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. No more 3 a.m. visits. A week passed, then 2, then 3. The police never found him. Yes, I asked them even though I knew how it would sound. My neighbors never saw anyone unusual. He was there, and then he wasn't. But that was almost worse, because people don't keep up a ritual like that and just quit. Rituals transfer. To this day, I still set my alarm sometimes. 3:15, I'll wake up, pull the live feed, and watch, just in case. Because what I never figured out wasn't just who he was, it was how. How did he always hit the same time? Never early, never late. How did he vanish past the frame every time without a trace? And why did he stop only after weeks of repetition? I still scroll the camera history every morning. But most of all, I still think about that smile. The one time he broke routine, the one time he acknowledged me. It didn't feel like goodbye. It felt like, see you around. If you thought the scariest part was realizing home doesn't always mean safe, smash that like button, hit subscribe so you never miss the next scare, and let me know what part hit you hardest. And if you're planning a getaway anytime soon, don't click book now just yet. Click instead on 4 disturbing Airbnb horror stories, because trust is the most dangerous thing you bring on vacation. Thanks for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.